Last time on the Fireside Tales. Terrence had arrived at the Abbey of Saint Michael, where he was going to learn how to be a giant slayer, from the wise teaching of Father Methuselah. He wanted to be like his own dad, Jonah. But he was not there for more than a few days before he realized that he was, well, clumsy. He caused all sorts of pestilence and plagues, and finally he was kicked out, but not before first learning that his father was not a giant slayer at all, that he had actually just been a squire for the knights. And now we will continue Terrence's journey. Father Methuselah sat at his desk in the library, and he worked away. He felt bad that he had to let Terrence go, but at the same time he realized that he hadn't had much choice, and that if he had let the boy stay he would have brought the whole abbey down. And as he was sitting there, scribbling away, he heard a loud noise, a loud thump, and he looked up, and he thought to himself that it had to have been his imagination, that it couldn't possibly be what he was thinking it was. But as he went back to work, he heard it again, a loud thump. And he sat up, and he got off his desk, and he ran out onto the yard and to the very top of the wall. And by this point, Roland and Sister Josephine and Mother Margaret were already there, and all the people were peeking their heads out of the doors of their houses, for the thumps were becoming louder and louder, and they were becoming closer and closer. Thump, 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 thump. And as Father Methuselah was watching, he noticed that the trees were falling down in the forest, and that birds were flying up in the air as if in fear. And he knew exactly what it was. There was a giant approaching. Well, Father Methuselah turned to his servants and he yelled, "Okay, Mother Margaret, go and get the warriors, round them up and have them ready for combat. And, Roland, go and ring the bell of Baldur. Get all the people in all the countryside to know what's coming. And, Sister Josephine, get the children to safety." And so they all went about their tasks, and Father Methuselah looked out, and he realized with fear that the thing that he had been dreading for years now had finally arrived. The giant in question was named Bonebuster, and he was a very old giant, and he was a very mean giant, one of the meanest of his kind. He didn't have anything in brains, he was just a creature that enjoyed eating, and he would eat anything that squirmed or moved he would pick up and swallow up whole without even thinking. He was also a very mismanaged giant. His hair was all tangled up, even worse than my own, and he had sharp teeth, and he had a stench that would cause the birds to fall down from the sky and land on the ground dead. And anyways, as the giant came towards a little farm, he saw a cow sitting there, and he picked it up and he swallowed it whole. And then he saw a flock of sheep close by, and he walked over and he picked them up and he ate them one by one. And the sheep were screaming. It was like... And anyways, luckily the farmer saw the giant, and he ran back to the wall with his dog, and he was able to get to safety. But the giant could hear the people screaming, and he could hear the bell, and he knew that there was a town there, and that there were plenty of good people to eat, for this was not the first town that the giant had ran through. But anyways, he started marching forward, and the people in the Abbey of Saint Michael could hear him thumping, and they could hear him approaching, and they knew a storm was about to arrive. Well, let's find out exactly what was going on with Terrence because this scene is becoming way too frightening for me. Terrence had been walking in the forest for some days now, and he didn't really have anywhere to go. He had thought at first that he would go back to Tartary and join his older brother as a blacksmith, but he realized that he didn't really have a place there any more than he had a place anywhere. So he decided he'd just become a wanderer and probably end up dying beside some tree. But as he was walking, he saw up in one of the trees a beautiful bird. And the bird had all sorts of feathers of all sorts of different colors. and it was a sort of scraggly bird, but there was a sort of odd beauty to it. And he picked up his bow, and he pulled back the arrow to shoot, but as he continued to look at it, and the bird looked down at him, he felt something a kinship to it. And he lowered his bow, and he put back the arrow, and he decided not to kill it. But perhaps this was not actually the best plan that he had, for the bird, seeing him, flew up into the air and started to fly away, letting out a loud caw, and this kind of startled Terrence, and he tripped and he fell. And he fell down just this little small hill that he had been beside, and he landed his head, unluckily enough, on a rock. Well, he laid there unconscious for some time, but as it so happened, an old man happened to be passing by, and this old man, if you ask me, was a Dryad of the forest, and as he looked down at Terrence, he decided to pick him up and take him to his little home, and try to nurse him back to health. Well, now we shall return to the story of the Abbey, which was in quite a bit of chaos, for the giant had broken down the gate, and he was marching forward, and a whole army came to attack him. They had their spears raised, and they were blowing their horns, but as they marched forward, the giant let out a burst of breath that made them all fall down and scatter like bowling pins. And the giant saw the bell of Baldur, and he broke down the whole tower, and he made it drop down onto the ground. He made it crumbled up, and he picked up the houses, and he threw them in the air, and the people all finally had no choice but to abandon their post and run into the cave and retreat and hide, and that's where they stayed. Well, I will go back to Terrence, because I'm a bit frightened for those people and want to hear more of Terrence's story. Terrence was laying there, and as he opened his eyes, he saw the old Dryad looking at him, and the Dryad exclaimed, "I was worried about you, my dear boy. You've been laying there unconscious for quite some time now." And Terrence looked around and he said, "Where exactly am I?" And the old man said, "I suppose I have some explaining to do. You see, I am one of the old spirits of the forest, and I found you laying here on the ground and took you back to my home. But, my boy, I can see that you have quite a story to you. You seem to have gone through quite a lot if you're wandering through these parts without any person with you or without any sort of supply." And Terrence nodded his head, and he explained the sorry tale to the old Dryad. And the Dryad listened very carefully, and when Terrence came to the part about finding out that his father was not a giant slayer, and being kicked out of the Abbey, he nodded his head and said, "My dear boy, your story reminds me of another tale that I heard, the tale of the farmer and the donkey. There was this farmer who had a donkey that did all sorts of chores for him. He would labor away, and the farmer was quite proud of the donkey. But one day the donkey fell into a well and wasn't able to get out. And the farmer called his fellow laborers, and he told them that they could try to save the donkey, but there'd be no point, and the donkey is very old, so they might as well put it out of his misery. So they began to throw down shovelful after shovelful of dirt, and this caused the donkey to panic. It began to bray and cry, but then they all noticed that the donkey began to stop, and they continued throwing it down, and the donkey was still silent, till finally they all looked down into the well, and they realized that whenever they threw a shovelful of dirt at the donkey would just shake it off, and he would take another step. And they did this over and over again, until finally the donkey was at the very top of the well, and he walked right out, and he went back into the farmyard. And Terrence, who was hearing the story, I will go ahead and admit was crying, for back in this time, crying was not seen in the same way as it is today. Back then, crying was actually seen as something manly. Very different times now. But anyways, the farmer said, I have one more thing to show you, my boy." And so he led Terrence to this cave. And on this cave there are all sorts of inscription, and the old farmer, the old Dryad, explained. This here is a cave that tells the entire history of the universe. It tells the story of all things that are going to happen. And as you can see, the world is in a state of unrest. A lot of the old spirits have been lost, gone away, and it seems as if they won't return except for a whisper. As we continue to advance in this world, as we begin to get windmills and technology, we'll begin to forget about the old world. The old world will be destroyed by this new one. It shall be taken down just as giants take down cities. But this is one of the sad parts of the story. For as we destroy this thing, we will destroy something that is quite beautiful. Something that needs to be there, that is a very integral part of the tale. My dear boy, this world is not as merciful as it should be. But one day I do believe that people will realize the use of creatures like you. It is a shame that they do not already, but perhaps that is their loss. And anyways, Terrence thought about what the old man had said, and he didn't know if there could even be a reason for a creature like himself. But he decided that he might as well not kill himself in the forest, and go back to the town of Tartary and work with his brother as a blacksmith. So he thanked the Dryad, and he was starting to head back. And as he headed back, he noticed that there was actually some strange trees that had been knocked down. And as he walked forward, he realized that some great creature had been pushing them away, and he noticed great big footprints. And he thought to himself very worriedly that perhaps this creature, whatever it was, although already he was thinking giant, was probably going to head to the Abbey of Saint Michael. So he decided to follow the footprints and see where they led. And by this time, the giant had already torn down the entire Abbey of Saint Michael. Every stone was broken, and every house was destroyed, and the people were huddled in their caves, and the giant was just making merry with some of the ale that he had found, and getting quite drunk. And he was like this for 3 long days, and he had gotten so drunk, in fact, that he had fallen down and gone to sleep. And it was at that moment that Terrence arrived, and he saw the giant, who was as big as, like, 2 boulders on top of each other. And Terrence, he decided to sneak past him, and he could hear the giant letting out burps and grumbles in his sleep. But he managed to walk over to the place where he knew Methuselah and them could be hiding, and he prayed to God that they were, and he yelled down into the darkness, "Hello, is anyone there?" And Sister Josephine yelled, "Terrence, it's you. Please, hurry down. We need your help." And Terrence did, and he came down, and all of them were there, and they were all looking very worried. And Father Methuselah explained, "Oh, have you seen the sight? Our whole abbey is destroyed. It will take us weeks to rebuild it. It looks as if all the damage that you done couldn't possibly have been of any worse than that damage that the giant did." And Roland looked at Terrence and didn't say anything, for he still felt a little bit ashamed about throwing him out and being the one that told Father Methuselah to throw him out. But anyways, Father Methuselah said, "I feel bad for the way that I treated you. I should never have told you that your father was not a giant slayer. That was uncalled for. I suppose that I just misspoke and said things that I really shouldn't have." And Terrence said, "Oh, it's quite all right, Father Methuselah. Right now we've got to be worried about what's ahead of us, not what's behind. This giant, it seems like it could tear down Tartary and all the other towns in the whole world, unless we do something about it." And Terrence, he thought to himself, and he thought as hard as he could. And as it turns out, Terrence actually would have been quite a good giant slayer, because he could really think on his feet. And he came up with a plan. Is there any place that we could go, any high structure? And Father Methuselah said, "Well, there is part of the wall that wasn't broke down by the giant." And Terrence said, "All right, well, you just leave it to me." And Terrence told some of the kids to follow him. Well, not any of the kids, but some of the girls there. Anyways, they walked over, and they got some a barrel full of that maple syrup that Terrence had used to cause all of the people's feet to stick on the floor. Well, anyways, they got that, and they got some bird seed. and they waited until the giant awoke. And as the giant opened up his eyes and he looked around and he scratched his, a rather inappropriate place to be talking about in a children's tale. He looked up and he saw Terrence and Sister Margaret there, and they were making loud sounds, and they seemed to be taunting the giant. And the giant, he started walking towards them, and they waited for just the right time, and Terrence then yelled for them to throw the maple syrup at the giant. And this is what they did. They threw the maple syrup in the bird seed, and the giant was very confused when this happened, and he began to run around, and he began to put his hands into his hair and wondering what was so sticky. And as he was doing this, the birds that had been hiding over close by and watching all of this disaster saw the bird seed, and they came flying forward, and they all began to land on the giant. And they began to flap their wings as fast as they could because the giant was hitting them, and they were able to lift this giant up, lift it high up in the air. I swear this is true. This is a true story after all, and it's been very detailed. It's been very recorded by the old sages of the Fireside Tales. But anyways, they lifted the giant up, and he began to go up into the air so high that Terrence and the girls there couldn't even see him. And they flew the giant over into some mountains. And I do not know what happened to him at this point. It is lost to the records, and if I had to make a guess, I would say the giant's bones were there to this day. But anyways, Terrence and the girls let out a cheer, and all the people came out of the cave, and they began to cheer wildly for Terrence. But as they were all so happy in their celebration, they didn't notice that there was some other sounds coming, something even bigger. And they could hear it, but finally they did indeed hear it. It was the thumps, the thumps, the thumps of some sort of a great beast. And they all stopped, and they looked out to see an army of giants approaching. And these giants were even bigger than the one that they had just taken down. And they all began talking amongst themselves, and Father Methuselah said that they should make a run for it. But again, Terrence could think quite on his feet, and he noticed that the giants seemed to not be very upset, and in fact, they seemed to be treading very lightly, almost as if they just wanted to talk to them. And Terrence said that they should just hear the giants out. And Roland said, "Are you crazy? They'll eat us all up. Did you see the damage that one giant did?" But Terrence was insistent until finally they all agreed, and they were quite nervous as the giants approached. But the moment the giants came within just a little bit away, just about a foot, they stopped, and they said, "Hello, I am Freyna, god of the giants," he said. And god is a title that the giants use. And he looked down at Terrence and said, "Well, my boy, you don't seem frightened. Many of the great knights of old would come at us and attack us with their swords." And Terrence said, "Well, we thought that we would like to hear you out first, before we did any running or we did any attacking." And Freynar, he nodded his head and said, "Well, my dear child, I am glad that you did, for we have not come to attack your abbey. You see, this bird here," and a bird flew up into his shoulder, and he realized it was the same bird that Terrence had spared in the forest, "told me what you did. This is one of my pets, my most faithful pets for my son here." And he pointed down to his son, who was a rather big giant, as big as a boulder, and he was grinning up at his father. "My son loves this bird, and when he escaped, he was absolutely terrified, and we had to search the whole forest for the bird. But when the bird told me what you did, sparing his life, I decided that I would do the same for you." And Mother Margaret yelled up, "But what about that giant that just came into our land? That giant, that stench was so terrible and destroyed our whole abbey?" And the Freynar said, "Oh yes, that was one of our most deadly criminals. We had him locked up away. He caused almost too much damage, for his brain was very small. But we are more than willing to make peace with you all, and if you like, we will help you rebuild your abbey, and make it even better and grander than before." And all the people there agreed, and all the giants began to set to work. And of course, Terrence was allowed to live there with Father Methuselah at the abbey. At least that's what Father Methuselah suggested. But Terrence decided that he didn't want to go there. and he told Freynar that he would love to be a member of the Giants tribe. And so it was very happy, a bit of peace between the giants and the humans in those days. And the abbey was rebuilt stone by stone, and may I say that it was stone of every color and every size and every kind. And that is all. I would also like to say very briefly, although I realize the stories ran a little late, that this story is about the Fireside Tales. Father Methuselah is not too much different from Father Martin, and the library was in fact the library of the Fireside Tales. We here at the Fireside Tales like to go back to the story whenever we remember how much trouble old Donald Trump or Barack Obama or any of those presidents cause for us and how annoying they are, and remember that sometimes the heroes, well, they come from the most unexpected places.